Hello, today I am joined by our CEO, Emily Taylor from the DNS Research Federation, and she's been working with her research team and others to explore the anatomy of a scam. That is, what actually makes up a scam, what's behind it, what is the detail behind it. And today we're looking at one particular aspect, which is what makes consumers click on links in a typical scam. So Emily, hello, good to have you here.
Thank you.
So the anatomy of a scam, the first thing that we're talking about is the debate about DNS abuse. How do you define DNS abuse?
Well, you know what, that's a very big question, and it's been quite a debate in the domain name sector for the last couple of years, and it's quite controversial because, of course, how you decide to define and measure things has a huge impact on what the scale of the problem appears to be. And Alex Deacon, one of our senior research fellows, has been blogging about this issue over the last year, and I just wanted to highlight some of his findings on measurements and definition.
So what we're looking at here, this is a chart that does what?
So what we're doing here is we're comparing the apparent scale of domain name criminality, let's say that, depending on how you measure it. So here we are, we've got the total reported URLs or links, if you like, that appear in the block list. So that is a large number. If you then remove the IP addresses, the numbers that define any device connected to the network, you get a little bit of a variation, not very much. If you look at URL shorteners, because of course if you want to disguise a link using those like bit.ly or other shorteners that sort of give a much more shareable, shorter link, that's actually a good way of hiding the scam. But in fact, then it doesn't really make an enormous difference to the overall volume. A bit. But the big change comes when you take out the subdomains. So what Alex shows is that actually you will have a domain name like something like refundpr.com. If you put then at a subdomain a brand name like O2 or HMRC, then the domain name appears, or the link appears completely different. If you take those out of the picture, which is what the DNS industry advocates, the whole thing, sort of the numbers fall off a cliff. And actually what you're then able to say is the number of fully qualified domain names involved in criminality is very, very low. However, what you have here is a great big governance gap, because who is responsible for the governance of abuse on subdomains?
Right. So that was quite dense, that stuff. So you were talking initially about block lists. These are published lists by third parties who are saying there's some domain names out there that are appearing in links, in web pages, in emails, and they have appeared on a list, meaning don't use these domains. These domains are bad, or they've been used in bad activity. And what we're looking at is the anatomy of that domain name, and we're looking at the factors that enable that counting of that name, if that's not too complex.
Yeah, exactly so. And, in one way, this is really an important distinction and nuance to add to the debate at an expert level, because it pulls into policy and regulation. Who is actually responsible for making sure that nothing bad happens in this space? And the answer is complicated. Is not, we're always, as regulators and policymakers, always want to go, well, who's responsible for this? Who do I pin the regulation on? And the answer in this graph is it's complicated, and actually there are some areas which are driving the biggest volumes of scams that have not really any coherent governance, no kind of single lever to pull, if you like, to make a bad thing stop happening.
So we've been exploring measurements of domain name abuse. Now let's think about the victim who is getting scammed.
Yeah, exactly, Lucien, because it's easy to get caught up in the detail of the measurement, and you can end up, if you're not careful, with the sort of angels dancing on pinheads kind of thing, where you get really caught up in the detail and you forget what you're actually talking about. So part of what we wanted to do with this project, The Anatomy of a Scam, is really understand what makes consumers click on links, and that means turning the telescope around. And instead of going, no, you're measuring it wrong, and this is a passionate debate about that, actually think about people and victims and what they're telling us about how they perceive the role of domain names or links in persuading them to click on a scam.
So let's have a look at that.
Right, the first thing is, who is actually falling victim to scams? In the sort of expert policy circles, when we talk about scams, the sort of trope that's always invoked is that of the little old lady. Poor little old lady, she's probably a little bit stupid and a bit half demented. And actually what we found immediately in our focus groups is that scams are affecting all ages and all social categories. So I should have started by saying what we did was we formed focus group with the assistance of experts in that area, Puffin Research. They put together a focus group of UK victims of scams, also people who'd been nearly fallen victim, and also people who had supported victims. And they came from all age groups, Generation Z, the 18 to 24 category. And there's lots of research that shows that, in fact, this age group is more scammed than any other. And that's really counterintuitive. These are people who can never remember life before the internet and smartphones, and yet they are falling victim more than any others.
Hold on. So you're suggesting, or our research is suggesting, that people who are or should be internet savvy, who have lived with it all their lives, are more likely to fall victim to scams than people in my generation who were introduced to the internet in the middle of their lives.
Yes, that's what the data is showing. And I think that this is a really important factor, because often, when we can't solve a problem, we blame the victim. And it's easy to dehumanise that victim by putting them into a category of already people that are vulnerable or elderly or whatever. But
So,
what we're seeing is, it's all age group.
So we just went across the age group. Who are we talking about here within those age groups?
We're talking about students, obviously, particularly in the younger category, but a doctor, we had teachers, we had a paramedic, a scaffolder, we even had somebody who teaches 3D modelling and design, who is an actual technical professional.
I think we've got some pictures of our generous contributors who gave their time and agreed to come on the record to discuss their issues.
Yes, these people very kindly agreed that we could use their image and quote from them directly, and others we're able to use the information they gave us without attributing to. But as you see from this little snapshot, it's all ages, or scams don't distinguish. I think that's a really important message. We should stop blaming the victim. We should stop compartmentalising them into whatever social group we choose, and recognise that it happens to everybody.
So we've talked about who we're talking about, who are those consumers, who are those victims. Now let's leverage that and talk about the role of domain names in the things that they're looking at.
Absolutely. We are the DNS Research Federation, and what we really wanted to understand is what role, if any, did the domain name, did the link play in persuading people to click on a link. And we use this term selective scrutiny, which is, when you think of all of the different things a person has to deal with in a day, and particularly things that are coming through on text messages or emails, you don't really give them the time and attention that they deserve.
No.
What you're looking for is like little mental shortcuts that can help you to decide whether or not something's legit, whether or not it's genuine. And this is what we call selective scrutiny.
So when I come in the morning and I look at my emails and there's a list of 50 emails or 50 WhatsApp messages, what you're saying is that I just do a scan through that and I'm looking for signals to tell me that's something I need to look at, that's something for me, that's something that's interesting, or rather that's something that may be legitimate.
Yeah, and it all comes down to, is it from somebody I know and I'm regularly in touch with? That's pretty low risk. But of course, that can be impersonated. And we see that in sort of so-called spear phishing, where you've got somebody who's actually impersonating somebody you're dealing with very regularly. That's a really hard one to spot. But then there's the organisations we know, but we're expecting to be in touch with at certain times of the year. We're coming up to a point in the year where in the UK everybody has to file their tax returns and pay their taxes.
Oh.
So a message saying you're late or do this, apparently from the tax authorities, is going to be the right timing. It will feel genuine and it will get your attention. And likewise, things that show that give some sort of either fear-based or emotion-based reaction, where it's like, I'm in trouble or I might get a reward and I need to act quickly. All these we know are part of the matrix that makes up the decision for people.
Yeah, interesting. So I'm frightened anyway around anything to do with tax.
Yeah.
And so what you're saying is you've got a heightened sense of attention.
Exactly. And also, when we trigger all of the fear receptors in our brains, we bypass a lot of our rational decision-making capability. We start to panic. But so, we know there are lots of factors at play, but what we didn't really understand is what role does the domain name play in that mix, okay? So we gave people little studies of things that were actual scam text messages. And here's one. This comes apparently from Ofgem, and people in the group, what was interesting is they call it the Ofgem one, okay? Look at the domain name. The domain name is actually secure-reg.com, and this is the thing we were talking about, subdomains. There is a subdomain here made up by the bad actor, and they've put Ofgem, which is the regulator of electricity and gas, right, in the UK. So eligible for a government-funded energy bill refund. This is something that is very topical, that in the energy crisis last year, then people were given handouts to help them pay their bills. So it is all plausible. And the domain name mentions the regulator's name. And one of the people in the focus group says, yes, this one could get you excited. It's in the news, current, promising money, and looks real.
And this is the supporter of a victim who fell for a scam. I'm not sure whether it's necessarily this scam. And you mentioned that the name Ofgem was in the domain name, but it was in a part of the domain name which is not strictly the domain name. It's called a subdomain. But from what you're saying, it seems that the consumer doesn't really mind what position that brand word Ofgem is in the entire domain name and subdomain.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that was maybe it shouldn't be a surprise, but I think it's often overlooked in the more expert discussions because people assume a sort of a level of knowledge, and they kind of overvalue the rational bit of the brain and undervalue the sort of more impulsive bit. And what's clearly coming through in these focus groups is they see a brand name somewhere, anywhere, and that's what they focus on. That's what they grab hold of in their selective scrutiny. So here's another one, apparently from the tax authorities, called the HMRC in the UK. And here we go. The supporters are saying things like, I might fall for it. It's got gov.tax, sort of fits together. So they're sort of looking at the domain name. Now, they're actually not looking at the domain name because the domain name is something called refundpr.com. They're
nothing to do with HMRC
Nothing
at
to
all.
do with HMRC whatsoever.
Thank you. And the next one.
This one, they're saying a supporter of a victim. Oh, this one's very good. The O2 is very good. But actually the domain name has O2-billing and then a bunch of letters and numbers.
Absolute nonsense.
And what's so interesting to me is they're seeing O2 and they're not seeing all the junk there.
Yeah.
In that selective scrutiny.
So we're going to see a video now of what people actually said about the role of domain names in the scam.
It looked genuine. because it had a link and it says Royal Mail straight away. And when I clicked the link, it went into the actual site.
And one of them looked really genuine. It looked like a genuine Euronics site. And I went in.
offgem.secure-reg.com. That could be, people could feel that be quite secure.
Because there's all real words. I don't know what .asp means, but they're all real words. There's no like funny letters or characters where there's nothing here that looks iffy.
So there you hear it from the victims themselves or the supporters of victims. They keep using the same terms. It looked genuine. It all looked real. I don't know what parts of it mean. So as you say earlier, this is selective scrutiny. They only need to see the brands in any part of that for them to be convinced that it's real.
Yeah, and this was a real sort of message that came through to me from this. And I would love us to do more in-depth kind of work with consumers to really understand that split second, what role the domain name plays, what role are familiar brands. But this early focus group is showing us that they do look at the link, especially in text messages where you've got almost nothing else to go on. And you can see from some of the younger ones that they're using the kind of education and training that they're getting in school. They're looking at the parts of the domain name, but they're only doing it incompletely. They're not actually able to distinguish between a subdomain or a big URL. And so if they see a brand name, that's what they go for.
So moving on, what was the impact of the scam and how did it make them feel?
Yeah, we started with the industry debates all about how you measure things and what do you measure. And what I felt this really leaves aside is how people respond to scams, how it makes them feel, what difference it makes in their relationship with the online world and so on. And we asked people to scale on 1 to 10 the strength of the impact that the scam had on them, the emotional impact. None of them said it had a low impact. They all said it had an either medium or high impact, and the majority group was the high impact. So this is something that really hits people, at least in the short term. And then I was also really interested in the words that people use to describe their emotions, because it can be very difficult to put emotions into words. They use things like embarrassed, silly, foolish, upset, powerless, vulnerable. And that comes through in the individual remarks as well. I felt stupid, humiliated, very cross, let down and vulnerable, angry, and so on. So the source of anger is towards themselves. I think what's clear from going into the focus groups more deeply is that as they get over that initial reaction, then they then feel angry with the brands they thought it was,
right,
who are also actually being victimised in this.
I'm interested in one of the top schools there being, more cautious.
Right.
And this is something that none of us want in this internet industry. In many ways, the internet is a wonderful thing. But do you want people more cautious? Do you want people scared of the internet?
Yeah, you want them to be smart. Of course, we all have a role in protecting ourselves to a certain extent, but we shouldn't be so timid that the sort of the offline real world equivalent would be you're so hit by something you decide never to go out again, and that is obviously a really bad result.
And so let's go back to our consumers again, and here we're talking about how it made them feel.
I got quite angry.
Yeah, I was angry.
And I just felt stupid.
I feel vulnerable on her behalf.
I just felt stupid.
Stupid, humiliated.
A bit stupid, a bit panicked.
And these are not stupid people, are they? You just look at them, they're people just like people we know. And they're all sort of using these sort of very powerful words to describe their emotional reaction.
Yes, I mean, you're listening to people, I understand one of them actually teaches cyber and security. These are people, but they're also busy people. They're bright people, but they're busy. and they were just caught out and
Yeah.
blame themselves.
Yes.
So what lessons have we learned?
Well, sort of going back to the beginning, what we learned is there's lots of different ways to approach the measurement and definitions here. But actually, if you turn the focus around and look at people, we see that the domain name itself, particularly in text messages scams where you have almost no other information to go on, the domain name plays a really important role in persuading people that something is worth clicking on. And when they see a brand name, even if it's in a subdomain, even if it's part of a URL, a link, that really bypasses a lot of the critical faculties, the selective scrutiny. We saw that scams have a very high emotional impact on people, and they tend to blame themselves when they fall victim, and that scams affect each and every one of us, whatever our age group, whatever our educational and economic background is. And finally, one of the things that really surprised me is how much we've all normalised the fact that there's no point going to the police. I didn't come across anybody mentioning, I think, these people should be arrested and go to jail. We've all given up on that.
Wow. So that in itself is the next study really is looking at what can be done about it.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic. Thank you very much. And thank you, Emily, our CEO from the DNS Research Federation. So today we've been talking about the anatomy of a scam, what makes a scam, and particularly the role of domain names, the full part of domain names, including subdomains, in scams and attacks on consumers. And I think the answer is, Emily, that the domain name is playing a key and critical part in any scam that involves consumers, typical scams. Thank you very much.